Hi, my name's Molly. I came back to visit. No warning, no heads up, just a gut feeling I couldn't shake. And I found her, my grandmother, alone, barefoot in the snow behind the house, left there like she didn't matter, like she wasn't once the woman who raised me, who made this place a home. Inside, there were mimosas, cake. My stepmother was hosting a brunch. They said she wandered, but I know better. How long had they been planning this, and what else had I already been erased from, without even knowing? What kind of family makes room for betrayal, but not for truth? The sky over Missoula was bruised with late November snow clouds when I turned off the highway. The temperature had dropped below freezing the night before, and every branch along the roadside wore a shimmer of frost. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. I didn't need permission to check on the only person who ever made me feel wanted in that house. My grandmother hadn't picked up her phone in 3 days. Vera, my stepmother, if we're being technical, had replied to my last text with a thumbs-up emoji when I asked if Grandma was okay. That was it. Not a word since. As I pulled into the gravel drive, I slowed to a crawl. No tire tracks, no footprints, just untouched snow like a sheet pulled over something dead. The house was quiet. Too quiet for a place Vera claimed was bustling with early holiday prep. I parked, turned off the engine, and stepped into the cold. The crunch beneath my boots felt louder than it should have. Something was wrong. I didn't head straight for the front door. Something made me veer toward the woods behind the house. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the flicker of something red between the trees. That's when I heard it. A low, broken sound. Not quite a moan, not quite a whisper. I started running, slipping once on the iced-over grass, my breath catching sharp in my throat. She was there. My grandmother, Evelyn Crow, curled like a comma beneath a pine tree, her legs bare, feet blue. Her nightgown was thin, barely holding back the Montana air. No coat, no boots, just skin and bone and frost. "Grandma!" I dropped to my knees beside her, pulling off my coat and wrapping it around her shoulders. Her eyes flickered open, then closed. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I fumbled for my phone, dialed 911 with trembling fingers. I couldn't feel my legs anymore, but I didn't care. When the dispatcher answered, I gave them the address in a voice I barely recognized as mine. I carried her back through the snow, one arm under her knees, the other braced around her back. She felt weightless, wrongly weightless. By the time the ambulance arrived, I was shaking from the cold and from fury. After the paramedics took her away, I stood alone in the driveway. The house, my childhood home, though it never felt like it, looked warm from the outside. Lights on. Curtains drawn, like a postcard. I opened the front door and stepped into music and laughter. Vera was in the dining room, holding a glass of champagne, laughing with a group of well-dressed neighbors. There were tiny sandwiches on a tray and a half-eaten cake with her name on it. Someone had tied gold balloons to the back of her chair. "Happy birthday, Vera," they read in cursive. She saw me and blinked, once, slowly, then smiled like nothing was out of place. "Molly," she said, casually wiping her mouth with a napkin, "didn't know you were coming." I didn't answer. "I just sent the home nurse out to run errands. Evelyn must have wandered off again. You know how she gets." I felt my fists clench. "She didn't wander," I said. Vera tilted her head like she was scolding a child. "Now's really not the time, dear. I've got guests." "She was barefoot in the forest," I said louder, stepping into the room. "In freezing weather, no coat, no shoes. No one looking for her." Vera's friends shifted awkwardly. One man cleared his throat and stepped back from the buffet table. "Let's all stay calm," Vera said, her voice syrupy but sharp underneath. "This isn't a scene." I walked past her, into the laundry room. Her friends murmured behind me. There, on the floor next to the dryer, were Grandma's slippers, clean, lined up perfectly. Her socks were on top, damp, as if they'd just been washed, as if someone had taken them off her and put them through the spin cycle. I held them in my hands, staring at the damp cloth. Behind me, Vera's voice called out lightly, "Why the drama, Molly? You act like I left her in the middle of a blizzard." I turned slowly and looked her straight in the eyes. "You did." The guests went quiet. I walked back through the kitchen. On the island, a tray of sliced birthday cake sat untouched. A woman in a velvet scarf handed Vera a manila envelope and whispered something into her ear. I saw the label, Power of Attorney Forms. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just neglect, it was an operation. I stared at that photo frame a second longer, letting the truth settle where denial used to live. My face had been there once. I remembered the original version, tucked away in a photo album my grandmother kept hidden in her closet. Now it was gone, cropped out with surgical precision, like I never existed. That image on the wall wasn't a mistake, it was a statement. The hallway had emptied. Vera's guests were leaving, their voices hushed and their eyes avoiding mine. I waited until the last one slipped out the front door before turning back into the kitchen. Vera was alone now, sipping her lukewarm coffee like it was any other afternoon. I picked up the envelope the woman in the velvet scarf had handed her earlier. Power of Attorney, the label read, neatly typed, but crookedly affixed like someone had rushed it. I slipped it into my coat pocket without saying a word. She saw me do it, said nothing. Her silence wasn't ignorance, it was permission. I left the house briefly to check in with the hospital. The sky was fading to that flat winter gray, and the cold had deepened. The nurse who answered my call was polite but tired. She's stable, she said, but there were signs of early hypothermia and mild dehydration. Her blood sugar was low, and she hadn't taken her heart medication in what looks like at least 3 days. I gripped the steering wheel harder. Is that normal for someone her age? Not if someone's watching her carefully. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the car for a while. I could hear Vera's voice in my head, echoing smugly. She's old, they wander. But this wasn't wandering. It was neglect. Or worse, it was engineered decline. You don't forget medication for 3 days when you're the one in charge. When I walked back inside, Vera was gone. I guessed she'd retreated upstairs, or was hiding in her sunroom with a glass of wine and a curated sob story waiting for Silas. The cake remained on the table, untouched now. Maybe the guilt finally spoiled the appetite. As I moved toward the foyer, a woman with a floral scarf lingered at the door. She looked familiar, one of those neighbors who always gave me the bless your heart smile growing up. She turned slightly, glanced around, and whispered, "This isn't the first time." "What?" "Your grandma wandering," she said softly. "It's been happening for months. Vera said it was her memory, said Evelyn was getting confused, didn't want to go to the doctor." I narrowed my eyes. "And no one said anything?" Her lips tightened. "It's not easy, you know, getting involved in family matters. Vera said you weren't around anymore, that she was handling things." I thanked her, but the words sat sour on my tongue. Handling things now meant leaving an 82-year-old woman barefoot in the forest like yesterday's trash. The door shut behind her. I walked slowly back through the hallway. It wasn't the house I remembered. It smelled too clean, like antiseptic and citrus wipes, as if someone had wiped down the walls of any memory that didn't serve them. I paused at the photo again. The missing edge where my face should have been stared back like a wound. Upstairs, I heard movement. Vera's footsteps, measured, delicate, like someone who had practiced making an entrance. She came halfway down, still holding her wine glass. "I can explain," she started. "No," I interrupted. "You're going to listen." She leaned against the banister like she was bored. "Molly, you're blowing this out of proportion. Your grandmother is old. She gets confused." "She didn't get confused, Vera. You left her," she scoffed. "That's a dangerous accusation." "Then sue me." Her jaw tensed, just a flicker. "I knew you'd come back with drama. You always had that flair for victimhood." I stepped closer. "You doctored her medications. You isolated her. You stood in that brunch while she was freezing outside and never said a word. That's not victimhood. That's a felony waiting to happen." She held up a hand, cool and slow. "Let's not make this into a witch hunt." The phrase made my blood boil. "You've been preparing for this," I said. "The power of attorney, the new photos, the little slips to the neighbors about her memory fading. You're building a case, not for her safety, for your control." She didn't deny it, just sipped her wine and looked out the window like I bored her. I turned away before I said something I couldn't take back. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I answered, already on edge. "Molly Crow?" a voice asked. "Yes. This is Nurse Reynolds from St. Mary's. Your grandmother asked if you were still here." I felt my breath catch. "Yes. I'm still in town. She said to tell you, thank you for coming back. She was very clear." I swallowed hard. "Tell her I'm not leaving." After I hung up, I headed into the living room again. I sat on the edge of the couch, still holding the envelope in my coat pocket. I knew I needed to open it, but something inside me wanted to wait, to do it when I had the strength to see just how deep this betrayal really went. The light through the blinds had dimmed. Dusk crept into the corners of the room, but I didn't turn on a lamp. I sat there, quiet, thinking about the way Vera had erased me from the photo and tried to do the same to my grandmother's life. When I finally stood, I walked back to the hallway and stared at that frame one more time. It hung straight, unshaken, a perfect lie, preserved in polished oak. That's when I knew this family portrait had been edited long before the frame was hung, but I'd already decided I wasn't leaving until someone else did first. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a full minute, staring at the photo, my mind racing not with panic but calculation. The house was quiet now. Vera had claimed she was attending a charity board dinner, though that could have meant anything. A hair appointment, a glass of wine, somewhere cozy enough for her to spin the latest story about the ungrateful stepdaughter who'd come back to stir trouble. Fine, let her talk. I had the house to myself, and I didn't plan to waste the opportunity. I turned and walked slowly toward the room that used to be mine, but had long since been converted into some kind of generic guest space. The smell of lavender cleaner clung to the walls, like it had been scrubbed of memory. I opened the door to Grandma's room instead. It was dark, except for the weak glow from the hallway. I didn't flip the switch. I didn't want to alert anyone passing by outside that someone was in there. I pulled my phone from my pocket, turned on the flashlight, and closed the door behind me. Her nightstand still had her framed photo of my mother, the only thing Vera hadn't thrown out, probably because it looked antique. I took a breath and knelt beside the bed, then opened the drawer beneath. Journals. I'd seen her write in them every night after dinner when I was a kid. Neat cursive, long-winded thoughts, and grocery lists sprinkled between observations about birds and neighbors. She used to let me read the old ones from before I was born, full of love notes from Grandpa and notes about church bake sales. I opened the first one. It started like always. Tuesday, made stew. Cold wind today. Then, nothing. 2 pages in, the paper had been torn out, not ripped in haste, but removed carefully, deliberately. I flipped further, another missing section, and then, finally, something. They said I'd be safer if I signed. But I remember what safety really feels like, and it's not this. My stomach clenched. I kept reading. Most of the entries had been erased, replaced with blank pages or clean tears. I looked at the edges. Some had that frayed look of being tugged from the spine. This wasn't just aging paper. Someone had done this with intention. I set the journal aside and walked to the tall armoire near the closet. I remembered it used to creak when opened, but Vera must have had it repaired. I gave the handle a gentle pull. Locked. I looked around and found one of those thin hairpins on Grandma's vanity. I hadn't picked a lock since college, when I got locked out of my dorm. But this wasn't Fort Knox. It clicked open on the 3rd try. Inside, everything was in perfect order. Silk scarves folded into even squares, jewelry boxes labeled in cursive, and one small pouch tucked behind a winter shawl. I recognized it immediately. Grandma's silver and turquoise necklace, the one she wore every Sunday for as long as I can remember. Vera had told me last spring it was probably lost during laundry. She said, "You know how forgetful she's getting." But here it was, clean, polished, and hidden. I held it in my hand for a long moment, trying to figure out which emotion was louder, rage, grief, or the cold satisfaction of confirmation. As I reached to close the drawer, I noticed a yellowed envelope pressed flat beneath the scarf pile. I pulled it out gently. It was a thank you card, the kind you buy in bulk, with gold letters on the front. Inside, the handwriting was rough, slanted. Miss Evelyn was always kind to me. I wish I could have stayed longer. I hope someone speaks up for her. Signed, Carlene. Carlene had been the maid here 2 years ago. Quiet, older woman. She left abruptly, and Vera said she wasn't a good fit. I stood, pocketed the note, and stepped back toward the hallway. Outside, the night had fallen. The neighborhood lights flickered on, porch lamps casting shadows across snowdrifts. I returned to the living room and sat on the edge of the couch. I opened the voice memo app on my phone and hit record. If this goes to court, I said, voice steady, they'll need more than my gut. They'll need patterns, paper, witnesses, the necklace, the torn pages, the journal entry, Carlene's note. I'm documenting everything. I paused, then added, this isn't about proving Vera wrong. It's about proving my grandmother still exists, that she hasn't been replaced by a narrative. I ended the recording and set the phone down. Then I walked toward the mirror in the hallway. I held up the necklace against my chest and stared at my reflection. I looked older, not tired, just different, like someone who'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. She wasn't just forgotten, I whispered. She was being erased. My phone buzzed, a blocked number. I hesitated, then answered. There was no greeting, just a slow, mechanical voice that said, you don't belong here anymore. Then the line went dead. I didn't flinch. I walked back into the living room, turned on the lamp, and wrote 3 words on a notepad I found in the drawer. Document, preserve, push. And then I underlined the last one twice. She wanted to erase the truth, so I made copies. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I laid on the old couch in the den with a blanket over my legs and my laptop propped against my thighs, the glow from the screen painting long shadows on the ceiling. Every few minutes, I glanced at the hallway. No footsteps, no doors creaked, but I knew someone had been in the house. The smell of the fireplace was too fresh. The timeline I'd printed was gone, reduced to ash, but I'd expected that. The copy sat safely in my email inbox, labeled For Attorney, Crow Case, and another lived in a private cloud folder titled, If Anything Happens to Me. By 7 the next morning, I was dressed and in my car. I left a note on the kitchen counter that read, I'll be back. Do not touch Grandma's journals. I didn't expect it to be respected. I just wanted her to know I wasn't afraid to lay markers now. The cold hadn't lifted. The frost still clung to the branches like warning fingers. I drove into town, turned off Main Street, and pulled into a faded lot behind the diner that used to serve the best biscuits in 3 counties. It still looked the same. Wooden blinds, cracked leather booths, a bell that jingled when you pushed the door. I needed coffee and some distance from the house, if only for an hour. But mostly, I needed to hear a familiar voice that hadn't been dulled by Vera's control. I slid into a booth near the back, near the old jukebox. As the waitress poured me a cup without needing to ask, I looked up and saw him. Reverend Howley, sitting alone with a paperback mystery and a cinnamon roll he hadn't touched. He saw me before I had to wave. Mind some company? I asked. He closed his book gently. Not at all, Molly. You've grown into your mother's spine, I see. I smiled at that, though it ached. Reckon someone had to. He nodded. I heard about what happened, not the details, just whispers. You know how this town is. People talk in half-truths. I sipped my coffee. Then maybe it's time someone finished a full sentence. His brow furrowed. Is Evelyn okay? She will be. But it wasn't an accident. She didn't wander. She was left. He looked down at his hands. She used to bring me homemade jam every other week. That stopped not long after Vera moved in. I tilted my head. Why didn't you ever say anything? He hesitated. Because Vera smiled. Oh, and because silence feels safer. There it was, the answer I already knew but still needed to hear aloud. Everyone knew, I said. Didn't they? He didn't answer right away. Some saw glimpses. Vera's good at pretense. She plays the caretaker role well. Most people just Didn't want to get involved. She's been isolating my grandmother, erasing her voice, her memories, everything, and the town lets her do it because she hands out checks at fundraisers. I never thought she'd go that far, he said quietly, but I didn't think she'd go this far either. We sat in silence for a while. I finished my coffee, thanked him, and slid out of the booth. On the way back to the car, I texted Silas again. Just a single line. You need to talk to me. No response. I stared at the screen for a moment, then opened my cloud backup and began scanning through old call logs, voicemail files, years of neglected communication. And there it was, an audio file I hadn't seen in recent memory, tucked into an old folder from my backup app. Dated 6 months ago. A voicemail from Silas, long since deleted from my phone. You don't understand the whole picture, Molly. Just don't ruin this for the rest of us. I played it twice. It wasn't angry, just tired. And that made it worse. I drove home slower than I needed to. My chest felt heavy, not with grief, but with resolve. Inside the house, everything was just as I left it. No one had touched the journals, but that didn't make me feel safer. It made me feel watched. I set up my laptop at the kitchen table and started building a timeline. I cross-checked dates of medical appointments with Grandma's missed pills. I added the afternoon she was left in the snow. I pulled statements from the nurse, notes from Carlene's card. I labeled every section and printed it out. When it was done, I placed the pages in the center of the dining table and added a note. In case anyone still thinks this is about drama. And I meant it. I stood back and looked at the room. The same place Vera had laughed with her brunch guests less than 48 hours ago. It felt haunted now. I didn't hear Vera come home that evening. But at some point after midnight, I stirred from the couch and smelled smoke, sharp, recent, distinct. I walked to the fireplace. The timeline I'd printed lay in the hearth, reduced to glowing black curls. The ash was still warm, but home isn't where I sleep. It's who I defend. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen as the coffee pot hissed behind me. The smell of burnt paper still lingered faintly in the fireplace, mixed with the scent of whatever citrus cleaner Vera insisted the maid use on everything. The memory of that timeline curling into ash wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't surprised. I had expected it, which is exactly why I made backups. I placed a fresh printout on the counter, this time in a plastic sleeve. Underneath, I slipped a sticky note with 3 words. This is evidence. I didn't hear Vera come in, but I felt it. An atmospheric change in the room, like a shift in barometric pressure before a storm. She walked in from the back porch, sunglasses still perched on her head, phone in hand, lips pursed in pretend confusion. Oh, she said, eyeing the folder. Still at it? I turned slowly. You burned the first one. She tilted her head. I thought it was junk mail. It was dated. It had printed photos, Vera. Her smile barely moved. Molly, we're both tired. You're making a mess where there isn't one. I stepped forward, laying down the new copy with deliberate care. These are being sent to the charity board, and to a lawyer. The smile vanished. You need to be careful, she said. Her voice wasn't raised, but something cold had crept in. You're not as protected as you think. That made me pause. I knew that tone. That wasn't a warning. It was a threat wrapped in passive aggression. Is that so? I asked calmly. Because I thought the person who left an elderly woman barefoot in the snow might be the one on thin ice. You always were dramatic. Maybe that's why you never quite fit in. Your mother had it too. That hit harder than I expected. You don't get to talk about her, I said, low and steady. I was here when she passed, Vera replied, adjusting her scarf. You weren't. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She wanted to cut deep, and I wouldn't bleed for her. After she left the room, I grabbed my coat and keys. I needed air and answers. I drove straight to the small chapel just outside town, Grandma's old church. It hadn't changed much. Same crooked bell tower, same dusty parking lot, same scent of aged wood and wax when you walked in. The secretary behind the desk was young, maybe late 20s, but kind. I introduced myself and explained who my grandmother was. She used to volunteer here, I said, used to write letters. The woman's eyes lit with recognition. Miss Evelyn, yes, she'd send cards and notes to everyone. I think we still have some in the back. She returned 5 minutes later with a faded manila folder labeled Community Correspondence. I sifted through the pages carefully. Most were recipes or thank you notes. Then I found one written in a familiar, careful cursive. I am writing because I feel myself disappearing. The house is louder, but my voice feels smaller. They say I need rest. But rest is not the same as silence. It was dated the day before Vera changed her medication dosage. I took a photo of it and slipped the letter back in. Back at the house, I headed straight for the home office. Vera rarely used it. She had an assistant handle most of her emails, but the desk drawer wasn't locked. I found it underneath a stack of promotional folders, a draft durable power of attorney with Grandma's name typed across the top. The signature at the bottom was shaky, hesitant, and dated 2 days after she'd fallen down the back stairs last spring. The fall that Vera insisted was just age catching up. I took a deep breath. Then I took pictures, front, back, close-up. I uploaded everything to my secured drive, along with the letter from the church. It felt good to move methodically, to do something with the mounting fire inside me. Then I sat down and wrote one final message. To Silas, if you don't say something, your silence is part of this. One day, people will ask what you knew. I'm asking now. I BCC'd it to myself, saved a PDF copy to the cloud. I labeled the folder in case they come after me and sent a copy to my attorney in Seattle with the subject line, "Do not open unless I disappear or get arrested." It wasn't paranoia. It was protection. By the time I finished, the sun had dipped low behind the ridge. I locked the front door and walked through the house, checking windows. Everything looked undisturbed. Until I reached the mudroom, the back door was ajar, not open wide, but enough to let in the kind of draft you'd only notice if you were looking for it. Taped to the inside of the doorframe was a note, handwritten in Sharpie. "You think this is your home now?" I peeled it down slowly. Read it twice. I didn't need to guess who wrote it. I folded it once, slipped it into an envelope, and added it to the file with the others. She could rewrite the narrative, but I had the truth, and this time, I had backup. I woke early the next morning to a heavy silence. There was no smell of breakfast, no clinking of dishes in the kitchen, no hushed phone calls from the hallway. Vera hadn't come downstairs. Either she was playing the long game or she knew the next move was mine. And it was. I dressed quietly, packed a small overnight bag, and drove to the hospital. I'd spoken to a lawyer the day before, someone I'd found through a friend back in Seattle. I had in my possession a medical proxy form from before Vera married into the family. It was still valid. Vera hadn't known it existed. Grandma had kept it tucked in her Bible, where I found it 2 nights earlier while going through her things. I walked through the hospital lobby like I belonged there. I gave the nurse my name, presented the proxy, and requested Evelyn's discharge. "Are you sure she's ready to leave?" the nurse asked. She was older, kind-eyed, but cautious. "She'll recover better at home. I've arranged for a private nurse and in-home support," I said, keeping my tone level. That part wasn't a lie. I had lined up help, 2 calls last night to a mobile care service that specialized in seniors discharged early. After a few more forms and another temperature check, they wheeled Grandma out to meet me. She looked small under the hospital blanket. Her eyes searched mine. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. I touched her hand. It was warm now, not cold and blue like the day I found her. We rode back to the Crow House in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been understood. Once we arrived, I helped her inside through the side entrance, away from Vera's usual path. We set her up in the old guest room on the lower level, the one that hadn't been redecorated yet. She smiled when she saw the patchwork quilt from decades ago, still folded neatly in the closet. "I thought she tossed this," she said softly. "She tried," I said, "but some things don't burn easy." After getting her settled, I made a call. Silas answered on the 4th ring. "Molly," he said. No warmth, no relief, just fatigue. I pulled Grandma out, I told him. With a valid medical proxy. She's safe. Don't pretend you didn't know what was happening. He sighed. Look, it wasn't perfect, but she wasn't in danger. She was left in the snow, Silas. No shoes, no coat, no supervision. She had missed 3 days of heart medication. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize either. We just wanted peace, he said finally. You stir things up. I didn't respond. I just ended the call and placed my phone down on the table without another word. That night, I started sorting through a stack of old boxes Grandma had hidden in the closet behind her bed. Some were filled with photos, others with clipped newspaper articles and letters. One envelope caught my attention, labeled, "For the bank." Inside was a draft will, Grandma's name at the top, my name listed as sole beneficiary. It wasn't signed. A yellow sticky note was still attached, scribbled in Grandma's careful script. Reschedule. Vera said next week is better. I stared at the paper for a long time. The date on the will, 2 weeks before Grandma's accidental fall. I took a picture and emailed it to myself. Then I printed 2 copies, one for the lawyer, one for the backup folder I kept under lock and password. The next morning, I met with Maren Feld, a local attorney recommended by the nurse at the hospital. Maren was younger than I expected, but sharp-eyed and to the point. You've got a case, she said after reviewing the paperwork and timeline I'd prepared. But you should know, this town, it protects its own. Vera is a donor. A name. You ready to be the one who pushes the first domino? I've already been erased once, I said. Not again. She gave me a long look, then nodded. All right, we'll file for a temporary restraining order to block Vera from accessing Evelyn's financials or medical files. You'll want a witness list. Document everything. Lock up every file and photo. I have, I said. And I'm not doing this alone. Later that evening, as I tucked Grandma in for a nap, she reached for my hand. Your hands are warm, she murmured. Hers were always cold. I didn't say anything, but the weight of her words sat heavy on my chest. By nightfall, the house was quieter than it had been in years. No footsteps from upstairs, no clicking heels, no clatter of fake social niceties being prepared for the next event. Just breathing, just space. I checked my email before bed. New messages had poured in, but one subject line stood out. Estranged relative kidnaps elderly woman for inheritance. Stay tuned. It was a link to a local gossip site. No author, no sources, just loaded words and insinuations. I closed the laptop and exhaled slowly. Let them talk. She wanted to scare me silent, but she just proved I was right to scream. I stared at the torn will in my hands, the edges jagged like teeth. No note, no return address. Just that cheap yellow envelope sitting on the porch like it had been dropped by a kid delivering newspapers. Vera's handwriting wasn't on it, but it didn't need to be. The message was loud enough. She'd found the document. She wanted me to know she could still reach me. I didn't flinch. I scanned the pieces, uploaded them, and added a timestamp. Then I made tea, sat on the couch beside Grandma, who was quietly reading, and told her we were going to need to be smarter, not louder. Just smarter. 2 days later, the rumor mill began to churn. A post on the town's online message board read, Mysterious Seattle woman manipulates dying grandmother for house. Another comment, You think she's really back for love? Check the bank records. Even worse, she's mentally unstable, always has been. Ask her brother. The last one cut the deepest. I didn't need to ask if it was Silas. I already knew how silence could scream louder than any words. Later that morning, I received a cease and desist email from a law firm out of Helena. It was full of vague accusations, harassment, slander, emotional distress. Vera had officially declared war. Maren, my attorney, called right after. This is textbook, she said. Character assassination to get ahead of the narrative. They want you rattled. Don't bite. I'm not rattled, I told her. I'm prepared. That night, while closing the gate outside the cabin, a man in his 60s walked up the road slowly, hands in his coat pockets. I recognized him. Mr. Yates, the neighbor who lived 2 lots down from Vera's place. He glanced around before handing me a small flash drive. "I'm not getting involved," he said quickly, "but my trail cam picks up wildlife and people. This one caught something last week. You'll want to see it." I thanked him. He walked off without another word. Inside, I plugged the drive into my laptop. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. There she was, Vera, in a long coat, pushing Grandma in a wheelchair along the gravel path behind the house. She paused near the tree line, looked around. Then she walked away briskly, leaving Grandma alone, unmoving. After a few seconds, the screen cut to black. I paused the frame, zoomed in. My hands trembled, not from shock, but from vindication. The date and time matched the exact morning Vera claimed Grandma had wandered. I texted Marin the file immediately, attaching a short caption, "Game, set, match." The next morning, I drove to the municipal waste facility, the one just outside town where our trash got hauled after weekly pickup. The office was closed to the public, but I knew the back road where bags sometimes ended up before being sorted. I parked off to the side and walked through the heap. It didn't take long. One bag stood out. An old Crow monogrammed sheet wrapped tight around what looked like bundled paper and plastic. I opened it carefully. Inside were Grandma's pill bottles, emptied, her handwritten grocery lists, a torn church bulletin, and a scarf I hadn't seen since last Christmas, the one I'd given her, red and soft with white stitching. This was no ordinary cleanup. Vera was trying to erase her. Back at the cabin, I arranged everything on the table. I took photos. I documented it all. Then I called a journalist. His name was Ben Morales. A quiet reporter, sharp-eyed, with a reputation for only writing stories he could prove. I'd spoken to him once, briefly, at a fundraiser years ago. I still had his card. He met me at a quiet cafe on the edge of town that evening. I brought 2 folders and a thumb drive. One was labeled official, the other personal. I didn't ask for pity. I laid out the trail cam footage, the forged will, the medication records, the burned timeline, Carlene's note, the voicemail from Silas, and Grandma's old letter to the church. "This isn't revenge," I told him. "It's prevention. If she could do this to my grandmother, what happens when the next Evelyn doesn't have a Molly?" He took everything and nodded. "I don't publish speculation. But if this checks out, it runs." Before we left, I looked him in the eye. "Don't bury this behind a paywall. Don't make it sound like just a messy family fight." He nodded again. "This isn't just a headline, it's a warning." By noon the next day, Marin filed an emergency injunction to freeze Vera's access to the estate. The courthouse clerk said it would take 24 hours to process. I gave them everything, even the scarf, especially the scarf. At dusk, I sent one final message to Silas. "Say nothing, fine, but don't act surprised when it all falls." He didn't respond. I didn't need him to. Later that evening, as I was locking up, I heard a soft thud at the front door. I opened it and found another manila envelope. No name, just taped closed. Inside was a photocopy of Grandma's will, the unsigned one naming me the sole heir. It had been ripped clean down the middle, but even home has echoes you can't unhear. The moment we stepped outside the courthouse, the air shifted. It wasn't colder, not technically. It was December in Montana after all, but something deeper had changed. The silence that used to feel suffocating now felt stunned, like the whole town had exhaled at once and didn't know what to do next. Flashes popped from local reporters as Vera was escorted out. She didn't wear handcuffs, yet, but the look on her face said it all. Not shame, not remorse, just fury that she had finally lost control of the narrative. Beside me, Grandma reached for my hand. Her grip was weaker than I remembered, but steady enough. She wore the turquoise necklace I'd recovered from Vera's armoire, the one Vera swore had been lost. It gleamed against her scarf like a quiet victory. "Let's go home," she whispered. I nodded. We didn't speak much in the car. I drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting gently over hers. The courthouse faded behind us as the headlines rolled in, online, on paper, and eventually, by mouth. Word in town traveled faster than snowfall. Marin called just before we turned into the driveway. They've revoked all of Vera's rights, financial, medical, guardianship. The judge has filed for criminal review. She's officially out. I thanked her. My voice didn't shake. I didn't cry. Not yet. That evening, I walked Grandma into the house through the front door, the one she hadn't used in months. It felt right. Familiar. Like unlocking a memory, not just a lock. Inside, the furniture had been rearranged, but not for comfort. Vera's tastes had overtaken the space like a slow rot, everything in sleek neutrals, cold surfaces, sterile lighting. Nothing of Grandma remained except for a single framed photo on a side table. I picked it up. It was us, me and Grandma on the porch, years ago. My hair was wild and she was laughing, mid-sentence. Vera had tried to crop it, but a corner of the old frame still peeked out underneath. A reminder she couldn't quite erase us all. The next morning, the newspaper landed on the doorstep. The headline read, "The Family That Left Her Barefoot." I poured coffee and read the article twice. It didn't editorialize, it didn't exaggerate, it told the truth. The documents, the trail cam footage, the voicemail, the forged papers. It was all there. Every page made the house feel a little warmer. By noon, people began stopping by. Some came with casseroles, others with awkward apologies. One man, a local shop owner, simply said, "I should have said something sooner." I didn't judge them. I didn't absolve them either. It was enough they came. Vera, I heard, had gone back to Helena. Rumor was she was staying with a cousin, waiting for her lawyer to sort things out. Her name no longer appeared on the church newsletter. The charity board had quietly removed her photo from their website. Silas emailed that afternoon. Short, no greeting. "I didn't know it was this bad. I'm sorry." I didn't respond. I saved the message. That was enough. That night, I sat on the porch with Grandma. The sky was clear and the air crisp. She held my hand in her lap, fingers tracing mine like reading Braille. "I thought it was over," she said softly. "I thought I'd just fade, quietly." "You weren't meant to fade," I told her. "You were just being silenced." She nodded, her eyes glistening but dry. "I wrote a letter, months ago. I didn't know if it would ever be read." "It was," I said, "and it saved us both." She smiled. "Good." The front door creaked behind us. Marin stepped out, holding a small manila envelope. "The judge wants Evelyn to consider a formal statement," she said. "They're considering charges, not just negligence, intent to defraud, endangerment." Grandma nodded slowly. "Tell them I'll write it myself." That night, I lit a fire in the old fireplace, the one Vera had filled with decorative logs that never saw flame. I tossed those aside and watched real warmth return to the space. I didn't gloat. I didn't scream. I just sat with the weight of what we'd survived and the knowledge that even truth, when finally spoken, doesn't undo the damage. It just stops it from spreading. As the embers settled and the house creaked around me like it remembered how to breathe, I glanced at Grandma asleep in her chair, quilt around her shoulders. And I knew, without needing anyone to tell me, we'd come home. But not to what was. To what could be. The air in the old house was thinner somehow, emptier. As I stepped through the front door for what might be the last time, the echo of my footsteps bounced off bare walls. The place wasn't exactly abandoned, but it no longer had a pulse. All of Vera's modern decor remained, gray tones, glass surfaces, curated silence, but none of it mattered now. Grandma stayed in the car, watching through the windshield, while I went back in alone. I told her I needed a moment, and she understood. I walked slowly through each room. The living room where Vera used to hold her charity teas felt like a museum now. No warmth, no life. The fireplace that once burned my printed evidence was cold, a layer of ash still visible at the bottom. I didn't touch it. In the dining room, I paused where the brunch table once stood, where Vera smiled and toasted her own birthday, while my grandmother froze in the woods behind the property. I traced the outline of a ring left in the varnish by a forgotten champagne glass. Then I entered the study. The desk drawers had been emptied, probably by Vera before her departure. But there on the mantel sat something unexpected. The turquoise necklace, the same one Grandma had worn into court, now returned, silently, without note, without apology. I picked it up, felt the familiar weight of it, and placed it on the mantel with quiet finality. "You were never just an heirloom," I whispered. The next day, Christmas Eve, we moved into the cottage on the edge of town. It wasn't big, just 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a view of the river that froze over by January. But it was warm. The kind of warm that came from knitted blankets and old recipes, not programmable thermostats. We baked cookies that morning. Well, I baked, and Grandma mostly told me what I was doing wrong. She laughed when I burned the first batch. Really laughed. It was the first time I'd heard that sound in weeks. I updated the folder on my laptop. Case resolved. Closure pending. I stared at the screen a long time before closing it. The case was done, technically, but closure wasn't a switch you flipped. It was something you earned over time. That evening, as the snow began to fall again, I sat on the porch wrapped in a quilt while Grandma dozed beside the heater indoors. The river caught the last light of dusk. The whole world looked paused. A letter arrived in the mail that afternoon. A handwritten? No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Silas. Inside was a single sentence. "I wish I had your courage. Maybe one day I'll say that out loud." I didn't respond. I folded it neatly and slid it into a drawer. Some bridges don't need burning. They just stop being roads. Later that week, Ben Morales, the journalist, called. The article had gone national. Syndicated. A few news outlets wanted interviews. Morning shows, podcast producers. A platform. "Would you like to speak publicly?" he asked. I paused, thought of Grandma, asleep in her chair, finally safe. "Not today," I said. "The people who needed to hear me already did." He understood. I started volunteering again the following month. A local elder advocacy group welcomed me in, no questions asked. I reviewed cases of potential guardianship abuse, helped draft better reporting procedures. The work was slow, not glamorous, but it mattered. One night, while drying dishes, Grandma looked over at me from her chair and said, "It's not just about surviving, is it?" I shook my head. "No, it's about being seen, even if only by one person." She smiled, then nodded once, like she understood something deeper than either of us could say out loud. As the snow thickened outside and the wind hummed low, I pulled an old photo from the drawer. It was us, taken years ago on the porch of the family home, back before Vera's shadow touched everything. I slid it into a new frame, simple wood, no glass. I placed it on the windowsill facing the river, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to be loud to be heard. Sometimes the loudest kind of love is the one that refuses to stay silent. What happened to Evelyn wasn't just neglect, it was a slow erasure, masked as care, enabled by silence. And Molly's choice to fight back, even when it meant standing alone, reminds us protecting family doesn't always mean keeping peace. It means standing up when others won't. Have you ever felt like the truth was being rewritten around you? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true, powerful stories that stay with you long after the screen fades.